Hello, and once again, welcome to Cultural Caravan. I'm your host, Ed Werner, for this series, where we're studying the history of Kenosha and Kenosha County. This episode is going to take us through the 1890s, which is 100 years ago. I think you'll find it interesting to compare the slides you're going to be looking at to what you know today. So what happened 100 years ago? Some very important names will be coming up in this series. For example, the Eichelman home became Kenosha's first hospital, or the Kenosha Hospital. The Allen Tannery, that many old-timers remember the last of the buildings before they burned down. The American Brass Company, who was one of the first industrial organizations in the city of Kenosha. And of course, today we still know the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. From an educational standpoint, many of us remember the old annex because we went to school there. And of course, the Penoyer Sanitarium, long gone, but now known as St. Catherine's Hospital. Simmons Company is represented, as well as the Roary Opera House. I think few of us remember the original Roary Opera House, but the old gateway has gone back to using the name of the Roary Opera House at the same location. Jockey International started about this time, and of course it's still a very viable going concern in Kenosha today. And the Jeffrey motor car came out in the 1890s, later became Nash, and of course it is the Chrysler Corporation in Kenosha today. So there's going to be a lot of name recognition in this program. I hope you enjoy it.
This is the home of Ben Eichelman in 1889. Later it became Kenosha's first hospital. The house is fronting on Exchange Street, or 5th Avenue, at the corner of Town Line Street, which was 60th Street. Mr. Eichelman, having been burned out by the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, moved his family to Kenosha, and in 1872 purchased this home. At the time, it was a one-story building. It was soon remodeled as shown in the photograph. The gentleman in the fence corner with the silk hat is Mr. Eichelman. In the group of three girls, in the center is Bertha Eichelman, Mrs. Hageman, and on either side, Una Slater and Madeline English. The lady at the fence is Mrs. B. Eichelman. The boy in the yard is unidentified. Mr. Eichelman gave the land for Eichelman Park to the city of Kenosha. About 1902, this home was sold to the Kenosha Hospital Association, and from that time it became Kenosha's first hospital and was used as such until the present Kenosha Hospital on Chicago Street, or 8th Avenue, was built. This is the Allen Tannery. The photograph was taken sometime between 1885 and 1890. The view is from the south side of Pike Creek, or the harbor, near the Bain Wagon Company, looking north. On the dock can be seen piles of cordwood, and nearby piles of bark used for tanning hides. The entire group of buildings burned on February 2nd, 1890. This photograph shows Kenosha's first brass factory, named the Chicago Brass Company, as it appeared soon after it located in Kenosha in 1886. Early industrial leaders in the brass industry pioneered by starting factories in the Midwest. That enabled stretching out to growing markets and reducing distribution costs. The coming of the Chicago Brass Company to this city was at the beginning of Kenosha's industrial era. By 1880, the consumption of brass had reached great proportions in the Chicago area, and that had become an important manufacturing center. T.M. Avery, president of the Elgin National Watch Company, a firm that consumed large quantities of brass, realized that a brass mill in the central part of the country was needed. Avery organized the Chicago Brass Company in 1886, and a small plant was built on the site of what came to be known as the American Brass Company in Kenosha. In November 1901, the Coal Brass Manufacturing Company of Torrington, Connecticut, a subsidiary of the American Brass Company, purchased the Kenosha properties of the Chicago Brass Company. The company operated under the name of the Chicago Brass Company until 1912, when the American Brass Company became an operating company. This photograph of Thomas J. Dale, mounted on a high-wheel bicycle which was made in Coventry, England, was taken in Ontario, Canada in 1886. The price of this bicycle was $150. The finish was highly polished nickel plate. The size of the large wheel is 52 inches. To use a bicycle of this type, the leg measure was taken to determine the diameter of the wheel to be used. The suit worn by Mr. Dale consisted of a black cap, dark blue coat, gray pants, and very highly polished shoes. The clothes, the bike, and Mr. Dale attracted much attention. Mr. Dale lived in Elgin, Illinois, and was known as the local Beau Brummel, capturing the hearts of all the ladies in the watch factory where he worked. Mr. Dale was a watchmaker and was employed in the watch factories of Elgin and Rockford, Illinois. Sometime around 1885, Mr. Dale was advised that there was an opening for an expert watchmaker at Kenosha, and so the next morning at 3 o'clock he was on a train. He arrived in Kenosha at noon, and inside of 4 hours he had rented a store and put up a sign on the window stating, "Open for business." In 1888, Kenosha had a new Chicago and Northwestern train depot. The new edifice replaced an old depot that was far from being an enjoyable place to wait for transportation to other places in the railroad line. This was Kenosha bus service before the days of paved streets. The service was known as the Kenosha Bus and Baggage Line. This photograph was taken on the north side of Park Street, 57th Street, between Main Street and Exchange Street, or between 5th and 6th Avenues. It was taken about the year 1890. This was Kenosha's second high school building, much later called the Annex. In January 1890, the City Council voted an appropriation of $10,000 for a new high school. After considerable disagreement, an architect was selected and work began. Just 15 years later, in 1906, a large wing was added to the building on the west side. In 1911, the question of safety came up for much discussion after cracks in the walls appeared. That resulted in alterations being made to try to rectify the defects and make the building safe. The building required much maintenance and later became known as the Annex. The Penoyer Sanitarium was built after the fire that destroyed the Ellen Tannery and the Kenosha Water Cure building on February 2nd, 1890. The Penoyer Sanitarium was the outgrowth of the former Kenosha Water Cure, which for over 30 years was successfully managed by Mr. Penoyer. Many additions and improvements were made over the years since the completion of the original building for the comfort and convenience of its guests. It was said at the time that no sanitarium in the country was superior to this one in Kenosha. On April 9, 1919, the Sisters of St. Catherine secured an option on Penoyer Sanitarium and its grounds. The sisters were in charge of St. Catherine's Hospital on West Prairie Avenue, that's 60th Street, and they planned to move their operation to the new grounds and a new hospital. The option covered not only the main sanitarium building and the 15 acres of land, but also 3 cottages and the entire equipment of the institution. The transfer of the sanitarium operation marked the passing of one of the most historic and successful institutions in the history of Kenosha. It was established in 1857 as the Kenosha Water Cure, which stood on the banks of the Kenosha Harbor near the former Main Street Bridge. Dr. Nelson A. Penoyer was born in Groton, New York in April of 1849. He came to Kenosha with his parents in 1857. At the age of 16, he began the study of medicine in Kenosha. Later, he entered the Hahnemann Medical College of Philadelphia and graduated in the class of 1870. Returning to Kenosha, he and his father became interested in the Kenosha water cure, which developed into the Penoyer Sanitarium. He assumed the offices of secretary, treasurer, and manager. Dr. Penoyer held membership in the Wisconsin Homeopathic Medical Society, the American Institute of Homeopathy, Illinois State Homeopathic Medical Society, and the Odd Fellows Fraternity. Dr. and Mrs. Penoyer, the former Miss Frances Furman, were active members of the Episcopal Church. This photograph was taken about 1890 to illustrate the need for paving Main Street or 6th Avenue. It was taken looking north from the south side of the intersection with Market Square or 56th Street and Main Street, 6th Avenue. The person crossing the 6th Avenue mud puddle with rubber boots is Mr. W.R. Harrison, and he has George Hall on his back. Nathan R. Allen, Sr., was the proprietor of the Allen Tannery of Kenosha. He came to Kenosha, or Pike Creek, on August 17, 1835, having walked here from Chicago. After coming here, he engaged in the mercantile business, which he remained in until May 1836. Then he began farming. After a visit of a year back in the East, he returned in 1841 and built stores and a dwelling, the latter being the first brick house in Kenosha. He was a partner in the mercantile firm of Stryker and Allen in 1842, but the firm dissolved after 6 months. He then clerked for John Bullen. He held various offices until 1850, when he was elected sheriff of Kenosha County. Mr. Allen was one of the original stockholders of the Western Immigration Company and invested his entire earthly possessions, amounting to $30 in the venture. Unfortunately, he only realized $3 for the money invested. In 1856, he commenced the building of his tannery. 10 years later, the tannery burned. It was rebuilt and was a successful business in Kenosha for many years. Mr. Allen died April 19, 1890, at his home in Kenosha of pneumonia. This photograph of the Simmons Company was probably taken about 1890 from the Main Street Bridge, looking slightly to the southeast. It shows the main Simmons factory building and the company's lumber yard. In the immediate foreground is a harbor slip used to unload the lumber that came in by ship to the plant. This slip was part of the harbor then known as the Bullhead Corner. The Roary Opera House was built in 1890 by Peter Roary Sr., who had arrived in the United States with his wife in 1873 from Germany. After some years in various cities in Wisconsin and in Chicago, he came to Kenosha in 1883 with his family. In 1890, he purchased property at number 164 and 168 Market Street, that is on 56th Street. The Roary Opera House was built on this property and opened for business on August 25, 1890. In 1891, Peter Roary's son, Joseph G. Roary, age 17, became the assistant manager of the Opera House. In 1896, after the building burned, Joseph Roary drew up plans for a new building. It was built and the Opera House opened again the following year. In 1898, Joseph Roary leased the theater and in 1900 became its sole owner. He brought big-name acts and top road shows to Kenosha. The theater was also the scene of political rallies and church and lyceum programs. In 1899, Joseph Roary introduced Kenosha to the motion picture through a movie company called the Kinodrome. In 1901, he introduced the first newsreels taken by Kinodrome at the Pan American Exposition when President McKinley was assassinated. He also brought the first color movie to Kenosha as early as 1902. This was the Passion Play, made in France, with each frame hand-colored, and it was one of the first full-length films, lasting 75 minutes. Just before World War I, Joseph Roary brought the talkies to Kenosha. These were the old, short-lived Edison talking pictures. A phonograph produced the sound which preceded by 10 years the advent of sound films. Joseph Roary retired from the theater and motion picture business in 1924 at the age of 50 and went into another business. In 1926, the Saks Amusement Company purchased the Roary Theater property, tore down the building, and erected a $500,000 structure as a movie theater called the Gateway. Here we see the Grant House bus, all dolled up for the photograph. The photo was taken in front of the Whitaker Foundry on Exchange Street, or Fifth Avenue, about 1890. Depicted is a barn-raising scene at the Alva Paddock Farm in 1891. The Alva Paddock Farm was located in the township of Salem on the Geneva Road, Highway 50, east of Paddock's Lake in Kenosha County. The Bain Hook and Ladder Company, number 1 of the Kenosha Fire Department, had their picture taken in full uniform in 1892. The Chicago Rockford Hosiery Company factory, prior to 1892, was the Kenosha Watch Case Company. The company was founded in 1892 as the S.B. Wilkins Company in Rockford, Illinois, when the field was still comparatively young. A decade later, Kenosha became the center of the industry. The plant was established in Kenosha in 1892 and became the Chicago Kenosha Hosiery Company. During the early years of manufacturing in Kenosha, the product of the company became famous under the Black Cat brand, and the company continued to progress, spreading its business into foreign lands and introducing its product in every civilized country in the world. In 1912, the N.R. Allen Sons Tannery in Kenosha was sold to the Central Leather Trust, and 2 of its leading geniuses decided to turn from leather making to hosiery. Charles Chester Allen and Robert W. Allen, who had been active with their father Charles W. Allen in the management of the tannery, took over the controlling stock of the Chicago Kenosha Hosiery Company. Continued leadership in its field soon brought the company to the realization that expansion in other cities was necessary. Therefore, in 1916, the Black Cat Textiles Company was organized and acquired the business and assets of the Chicago Kenosha Hosiery Company and also the Cooper Manufacturing Company of Bennington. They added a line of spring needle underwear, and later bathing suits and sweaters were further line additions. In 1920, the company changed its name to the Allen A. Company in order to combine under one brand name the products of the Black Cat Hosiery and Cooper Bennington underwear. Increased demand for women's full-fashion silk hosiery necessitated construction of a new mill at Kenosha in 1924, and a large addition was made to this in 1927. In 1938, a reorganization of the company was made, and the name of the company changed to the trade name of Kenosha Full-Fashion Mills Incorporated. Later, it was known as Cooper Incorporated and as Jockey Menswear. Today, the company is known as Jockey International. Located on the lakefront, next to the Northwestern Wire Mattress Company's factory, later the Simmons Company, was the Hannis and Jackson Company, which manufactured cribs and trundle beds for children. In 1892, the factory was caught in the greatest fire which ever swept the city of Kenosha. The factory, along with the Northwestern Wire Mattress Company, was entirely consumed in the fire. After the fire of 1892, they built a new and larger factory on property on 52nd Street, where they manufactured tables and other furniture until 1938, when the factory was permanently closed. This is the first graduating class of the College of Commerce in June of 1894. Mr. and Mrs. Otis L. Tannery established the College of Commerce in 1893. This photograph is of the first graduating class of June of 1894. The Sterling Bicycle Works, located in Kenosha in the year 1895. Their main building was 500 times 100 feet. Capacity was 25,000 wheels per year. And the company's slogan was, "Built like a watch." The factory was sold to Thomas B. Jeffrey about 1900. The building later became a part of the Nash Kelvinator Company. This photograph of the T.J. Myers livery stable was taken about 1895. It was located on the south side of Market Street, or 56th Street, a half block west of Main Street, or 8th Avenue. The location was known as the Myers Block until purchased by the Wisconsin Gas and Electric Company. It is thought that the location had been a livery stable since the days of Southport, as the following advertisement appeared in the Kenosha Telegraph dated September 27, 1866. Livery stable. The subscriber is prepared to furnish the best horses and carriages for business or pleasure on the shortest notice. Stable on Market Square near the post office. Hearse at all times ready to attend funerals. Signed, Henry Jewett. This photograph was copied from the advertisement of Harry A. Kupfer, which appeared in Kenosha papers about 1895. Mr. Kupfer sold his livery business in 1903. This photograph dates to sometime around 1895. The team of 3 white horses and the double 80-gallon tank chemical fire extinguisher to which they are hitched was one of the first pieces of apparatus that began the transition of the volunteer fire department to a paid department. This was first operated by 2 men, John Rice as the driver and Captain Al Wallace as hoseman. Upon the sound of an alarm, the volunteers were supposed to leg it to the fire and to try to outrun the horses, but the men never got there first. This outfit was installed and used during the time James S. Barr was chief of the department, which was from January 13, 1890 to October 10, 1905. The names of the horses were Lee, named after Lee Fellows, fire chief from January 12, 1880 to January 10, 1881, Barney, named after Barney McGivern, chairman of the City Council Fire Department Committee, and Jim, named after James S. Barr, chief of the department. This outfit was quartered in the central engine house on Market Square. This thrashing scene was photographed near Silver Lake, Wisconsin on the Holler Farm, a half-mile west of the large Hockney Farm. The photograph was taken in August of 1895 when horses were used exclusively to extract the grain from Wisconsin straw. The thrashing machine shown in this photograph is of the type built by the J.I. Case Thrashing Machine Company of Racine. During the period from 1869 to 1881, when the sweep horsepower with tumbling rod was the source of power, in the days before the steam and endless belt became popular. This is Charles Duryea, winner of the first American automobile race in 1895. The description of the photograph illustrated here denotes the result of the first American automobile race. The copy reads, 5 miles an hour victory of 43 years ago. The race was from 55th Street in Chicago to Evanston, Illinois at a pace of 5 miles per hour. The round-trip race took place in 1895. As Kenosha was one of the original centers for the construction of motor cars, this story would be of local interest. The honor of being the first to make a successful gasoline automobile belongs to Charles E. Duryea. When he was about 25 or 30 years old, he saw a stationary gasoline engine with electric ignition and made up his mind that such an engine could be used to run a buggy. He studied the idea and experimented with constructing gasoline buggies until he finally succeeded with the completion of his 5th buggy experiment in 1895. The 5th buggy had most of the main features of the modern automobile, such as a 4-cylinder engine with water jackets, electric ignition, bevel gear differential, rigid front axle with steering knuckles at the ends, and pneumatic tires. It is to be noted that this was the first machine in America to be fitted with such tires. This motor car was built by Thomas B. Jeffrey and John Bjorn in Chicago before either of them became residents of Kenosha. This was the only car built of this model. Construction was begun in 1894 and completed in 1897. It had a one-cylinder engine with the cooling device under the seat, just to the rear of the balance wheel. Wheels were extra heavy bicycle wheels with a specially fitted hub. The frame was made of gas pipe, and it took 3 years to build this car. The speed of the vehicle was told at the time as just as fast as 5 or 6 men can push it. Josiah Bond, a leading Kenosha citizen, was the first president of the Kenosha County Historical Society. The society dates back to 1878. This photograph of the Kenosha Harbor was taken about 1895 from the Main Street Bridge, looking north. The photo shows a steam vessel unloading coal at the John O'Donnell coal yard and a 3-masted sailing vessel unloading lumber. Washington Island, or Simmons Island today, is in the background. And notice the 1866 lighthouse. The sign on the bridge is of C.H. Hackley and Sons Drugstore. The drugstore was located at the corner of Main and Market Streets, 6th Avenue and 56th Street, in the Durkee Warehouse building. The Durkee Warehouse was later replaced by the Epstein building. The view in this photograph is of the Kenosha Harbor, looking west into the harbor from the North Pier. At the time, about 1897, both steam vessels and sailing vessels regularly used the harbor. The schooner Contest sailed from its home port, Kenosha, for 19 years, from 1869 to 1888. The captain was Robert Simmons. The schooner was wrecked on April 16, 1897, south of the Kenosha Harbor Pier. The crew was saved by Captain Ben Cameron and his crew of lifesavers from the Kenosha Lifeboat Station. Captain Simmons ended his sailing career in 1899, having sailed the high seas and lakes since the year 1848. He was a resident of Kenosha for many years and a sailor for 51 years. He passed away on November 14, 1916.
Well, this completes the 1800s. I hope you enjoyed the program so far. Next episode, episode 7, we'll go into the new century. We'll start the 1900s. If you notice, the last slide in this episode was of the sailing vessel Contest. Besides many fires that Kenosha experienced in those days, many sailing vessels were sunk. And the life-saving service, later the Coast Guard, made a lot of daring and heroic rescues. The Contest herself was lost just south of the main harbor entrance a few years later, and Captain Cameron and his crew of lifesavers rescued the crew. So there are many, many stories that we know behind the scenes. Well, this is your host, Ed Werner, thanking you for joining us, and we hope to see you again for episode 7.